Hi everyone, welcome to this special, I have to say, special joint episode of the Fraud Fellas and the AI Spy. I'm excited because I'm joined by my good friend Anis. And today, Anis and I are diving into a topic that has been front and center for banks and security teams, but everybody's ever since Mr. Sam Altman in a recent conference at the Federal Reserve, he brought light to the vulnerabilities in voice authentication. Anis has made the case, and brilliantly, I must say, in his latest ISMG article, that banks must move beyond breach protection and into breach resilience. So, Anis, firstly, welcome. How you been?
Thank you, Anurag. Thank you so much for having me on this on the AI Spy once again. And it's amazing that we are doing this together.
Yeah. But anyway, so before Anis, the way I want to go through it, and before we dive into what is the way forward, and let's just talk about the rise of voice authentication. I remember when I started in the fraud fighting space back in 2013, the voice authentication was the poster child of security. It was the new big thing. Everybody said, hey, your voice is your password. Nobody can clone your voice. There are so many unique fingerprints in your voice that it's almost like a fingerprint. Like nobody can, duplicate your fingerprint. Nobody can duplicate your voice. And this was the it technology at that point in time. And if you look at some stats, right, the early promise did hold up. Like here in 2020, by 2020, HSBC Voice ID had like, I don't know, 2 million users, and it was working. They protected a lot of fraud. So let's go to that early promise. What do you recall from the early days of voice authentication?
Well, I'll give you an incident. Back in 2014 and 2015, we were encountering some SIM swap frauds. The hits were very big. We lost a few $1 million only with a handful of less than a handful of incidents. So we were contemplating what kind of technology or what can we do to prevent such SIM swap fraud incidents. So voice biometrics was very popular in the UK at that point of time, and that is one of the recommendations that came up during discussion with the exco committee members. Although it sounded very promising, I was not so fond of it because I have been reading about incidents where voices started being cloned, the faces getting cloned. So I was not fond of that. But fortunately we did not deploy this solution for various other reasons, which was gathering the voice samples of the customers and deployment time frame, etc. I'm glad we didn't do that. Um, it's what 10 years now,
Yeah.
and now in last 1 year the landscape has changed so much that we now know that we cannot rely on voice biometrics or even facial biometrics to a larger extent. Yes, it's an ever evolving one. However, there are certain technologies which are going to stand out for a long time. There are other technologies which may not. So voice biometric is something which I don't believe. I didn't believe in it that point of time 10
Back
years
then,
ago. Back then, yes,
and still don't believe in it.
I
So,
still don't believe it.
and rightly so. You mentioned the point about onboarding the customers and gathering a large number of voice prints. I remember there were two types of technologies when voice authentication was. One is passively collecting the voice print, so you have to read a very specific phrase that they give you. Like the quick brown fox jumped over the something. You have to read that a very specific phrase. And then there was the other set of software providers who said that no, we'll take an active voice print. As you are talking, we are going to keep sampling your voice, and that will be the active enrollment. And this is easier onboarding experience. And in some way, I feel that more than the security aspect of it, it's the frictionless approach that you don't have to look for your password or something, and it's easier to authenticate. And particularly for that call center channel, that I feel that the frictionless nature of it was more of the appeal. What is your opinion on that?
So how do you collect the voice samples? Collect it by, like what you said, asking the customers to read out a phrase or something. And I believe it's friction.
Yes.
you're asking, I remember one of the banks here in the UAE, they introduced a similar technology, but voice biometrics and behavioral biometrics, where as a customer, I was asked to swipe on left or right, to see how my finger movement. I mean, and the same thing happened with the voice. I had to read out that my voice is my password.
Yeah.
And I had to do this a few times. And I found it really, it's not customer friendly. It caused friction. And the second way of gathering the voice sample is through the call center. How often do we call the call center?
Yeah. I don't remember last time I called my bank actually.
Right.
I honestly, it's one of the most painful conversations, so I try to avoid it as much as possible.
Right. Yes. The other option is to passively gather the voice samples when customer interact with their phones, but that would be against
Intrusive.
privacy laws.
Yeah.
Yes. So the only way is to have them read out something on the phone, and which I believe causes a lot of friction.
So now the bubble is burst. We know that deepfake technology can clone a voice, and few seconds or let's say a minute worth of voice recording can result in very accurate deepfake. So someone can take a slice of this podcast that we are talking on and recreate our voice. And we've seen this back in 2019 was the first reported case. I remember when the UK bank CEO's voice was cloned. And maybe at that time, the cloning technology were more expensive, not as accessible. But today, with the proliferation of AI, it's easily accessible. Anybody can go online and find software, and it's very easy. You don't need to set up a rig or anything. It's just available. All you need is a decent laptop and internet connection, and you can get started. So I think that's burst the bubble, and it's clear that there are gaps. So how does this change the approach to the authentication landscape? Does it mean that we move beyond voice authentication and even to some extent facial recognition, or there is still a place for these technologies in the authentication landscape?
A year and a half ago, I was speaking at one of the events here in the UAE when I was doing the research on that. It took about $4 and 8 minutes to clone a voice and do a face swap. We're talking about almost 18 months ago. Now it's far easier. The amount of apps that you have, uh,
Yeah.
a couple of dollars, and within few minutes, it can easily be done. Right. Now, in my view, is obsolete. Voice authentication is obsolete. We cannot depend on that at all if that is the only way of authenticating your customers. However, for the time being, if you rely on device intelligence, uh, you know, uh, you rely on behavioral intelligence. So I still believe that you can rely on it to some extent. However, we also need to understand that device intelligence can be spoofed. Behavioral intelligence is, although it's good, it's getting better. The success rate is not so high because human behavior is complex. But yes, it plays a very, very important role today in identifying what is authentic and what is not. So my thought process would be that eventually institutions should plan on shelving this technologies and bring in new technologies.
Now, what I enjoyed in your article, and I think the premise is brilliant, that breach resilience, moving beyond breach protection. But let's focus on the first part. You make the case that breaches are inevitable, and in some cases, it's going to be unavoidable. Just the nature of how we operate now. So, can you elaborate on what you mean there?
So again, going back to some incidents that I have handled during my career as a banker, and investigating corporate breaches and investigations, data breach incidents, I've realized that the ecosystem is built in such a way that there will be either data breaches or data privileges. You can't avoid that. Say, for example, credit card. I'm a bank who issues credit cards, and I have a tie-up with a wallet, a wallet in a mall,
Yeah.
and my customers are allowed to go park their car at a valet in a mall, and when you give the card, the valet company is not going to have data protection policies as good as yours, right? So either the cost of those services become very expensive, or it practically it becomes not so manageable. That's where it happens. That's where the breaches happens. The fraudsters or the hackers, they look for low-hanging fruits, and a small vendor who has some relationship with banks and manages certain amount of data is a low-hanging fruit for them.
Yeah.
And when you look at from the banking perspective as such, the technologies, the infrastructure that you use, of course, the breaches don't happen so easily. However, with the third parties and the other ecosystem partners is where the breaches can happen, and those are unavoidable.
Yeah, I think I was talking to Francis West, who runs a cybersecurity firm in the UK, and she was showing me a timeline of the breaches, and you can see the volume and the amount of data. So if you just take all the breaches that have already occurred, and it's one service after the other. Recently, we have the SharePoint, so it's not like one service is more resilient. There are everything. There are breaches around, and there will be more and more breaches. So our data, passwords, like you said, are common. So OTP as a mechanism is not so secure as well. So how do we move beyond this? What does the world? I think it's a brilliant term that you've coined now, breach resilience. What does a resilient post-breach response look like? Is it multiple layers? What is it?
So let's focus from the payment perspective. Over 2.5 decades of my anti-fraud career, what I have realized is the criminal syndicates or fraudsters in general, they're very focused on return on investment. Why do they steal the data? To reuse the data for financial benefit. If that possibility is limited, data doesn't have any value, it doesn't make any sense to them. Like the amount of data we have on the internet is as good as that. So when we talk about breach resilience, we are making the job of fraudsters harder to perpetrate, that when they steal, they cannot reuse. So from the payment ecosystem perspective, why today we rely on customer information, customers' financial information like card information, account information, pins, passwords, etc., for authenticating a customer. So today, institutions don't interact with the customers, they interact with the users. And how do they identify this particular device or this particular user is my customer? Is with the use of pins and passwords.
Right. Right.
And when you talk about breach resilient solution, the solution should not rely on shareable data in order to, identify their customers or the, create the link between the user and the customer. And when you do that, you are hitting hard on fraudsters' return on investment. They see no point in stealing the data when they cannot make use of the data, because when they buy the data, it's an investment. When they open a mule account, it's an investment. When they buy a device, it's an investment. And when that investment doesn't give them any return, there's no point in doing the business. So when we talk about breach resilient solution, the solution should be good enough to not rely on any shareable data to authenticate or identify a customer.
Yeah. So anything that we have to memorize or write down, it goes away. It's
Yes,
more dynamic, and
yes, or
there are
shareable for that matter. Even
yeah,
the OTPs,
right.
both in their SMS form or soft token form, are still shareable.
Yeah. Yeah, I see. So, Anis, are there any specific techniques that we want to? I still want people to go and read the article. I don't want you to give away the whole article here. Are there one? Passkeys seem to be very popular now. Right now, Microsoft and many other large organizations are using passkeys. So, is passkeys one of them? And what are the what are the technology or methods beyond passkeys can we rely on?
So, in my view, Anurag, passkeys or cryptographic enabled keys,
Right.
we use the word passkeys commonly, but it's cryptographic keys, right? Cryptography is the way forward. And it has proven to be effective when transferring the data between banks to regulators, between service providers, and etc. The public key infrastructure has been proven to be effective. And that's precisely what we're talking about in the payment ecosystem when it comes to authenticating the customers. So every once in 2-3 decades, there is a big leap in technology that changes the way the payment ecosystem behaves or the way we conduct business. So if you remember when we moved from Max Chip to EMV chip, there was a huge jump. And what happened was all the card not present frauds came down substantially, almost, came to zero across countries, across jurisdictions. Now it's the time for passwordless. When we say passwordless, I believe we have to depend on technologies like cryptographic enabled keys. We have to rely on behavioral biometrics and, the regular stuff like device intelligence and other things that comes into picture. So this three technologies itself are very, very effective combined with real-time transaction monitoring, AI-driven real-time transaction monitoring.
Yeah.
I think this would be really effective for banks and payment companies.
Thanks. It was great catching up, and I think we should do a few more of these joint sessions. I will add the link to your article in the show notes and also in the post, the LinkedIn post. And that's a wrap on this one. We wanted it to be very quick, short, and sweet. I think we give some takeaways. Also, we'll post all the links where you can find more details. Anis, anything you want to add before?
I think, if they read the article, they'll be able to get the gist of what we are talking about.
Yeah.
Breach resilience is the need of an hour. We are not thinking about breach resilience solutions 2 years down the line. We're talking about it now. Even
Now.
the latest NIST standard that came out a few days ago is talking about breach resilience in its form in the zero tolerance. So I think it's a need of an hour, and whoever embraces the breach resilience solutions, they will have a competitive advantage over, others.
Excellent. On that note, let's wrap up. It's a wrap. And again, we'll see you again with another A-lister very soon. Until then, bye.
Bye.